Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So, hopefully, I'm going to be able to see the comments this week. I think I have the right mic on. I think we're all good. So, I wanted to talk about this week pets because it happens to be coming up in conversation right now. It's something that comes up a lot over the past several years, especially. It seems like a lot of people are having very strange and complicated things going on with their pets and their animals, with their pet situations. And, we look at pets as our like companions, of sources of unconditional love, which they are in many cases. However, every the way I understand it, the way we all sort of decide on how we're going to manifest our physical body into this reality, whether it's an animal or a person or a tree, um, or a fish or whatever, it has to do with what energy we're here to represent and um, and be in the reflection of the whole, right? So we can see that from the higher picture, but we get very emotional about our pets. And so, it's funny is I've worked with many over the years about their pets. I've worked a lot on my own pets, my own situations with my own pets. And, over the past several years, there have been a lot who've had pets that have decided it was time to go. Yeah, it was time for them to, what people call crossing the Rainbow Bridge or whatever. And we look at it with such mourning and grieving and all that kind of stuff, and then we think, oh well, the poor animal, and we feel like they're helpless. And it's an interesting part of a reflection to ourselves that we very rarely look in the mirror about. And yet one of the biggest, clearest soul agreements that we have are those animals that end up being our pets. So, I can give you a bajillion different stories, right? But I mean, I have um, let me give you some examples. I had a dog, River, who was only 6, I think. He was only 6, and developed lymphoma and died. Excuse me, developed lymphoma for the sole purpose, from my understanding, that because he had been always healthy before that, for the sole purpose of me taking on learning energy healing. That was my introduction to energy healing years ago, because I would sit with him and I would do energy work on him constantly. And he did great all the way through when he died. I mean, the day before he passed, I was throwing treats. He was catching them, jumping up in the air and catching them. So, and then the next morning he just had a seizure and that was it, it was a great way for him to pass. And and when he passed, I had my hands on him, and I was helping him over, like, it's almost like a little brick wall or a fence, I remember. And then he just sort of ran free. And so, it's interesting. So first of all, we get so emotionally attached to our pets, right? We think of them as a respite away from people. I can't tell you how many people I know who've said, oh, I care about my animals more than I care about other people. And it's interesting because there's so many facets of what pets can represent for us. Whether they're dogs, cats, rabbits, mice, it doesn't even matter. It's an outlet for us to, excuse me, to hit on unconditional love, to feel like we're receiving unconditional love. But in many cases, it's what we want to reflect back to ourselves. So yeah, then you have pets who don't do that, and then you have pets who have anxiety issues, and there's a lot of that going on right now. Well, here's the thing: pets have these soul agreements with us, and that's why they become our pets. Um, Something that's very, very clear that I've seen in so many situations where a pet has agreed to become sick because, or take on something that the owner did not want to look at otherwise, right? And so we can see it so much clearly because there's not a lot of chitter chatter. The animal's not talking to us with words, So we're used to not communicating. We're not used, we communicate with them in different ways than than verbally. And many animals, many here in animal form, excuse me, gosh, I didn't even yawn before I got on, so this must be a big topic. Spiritual energy. But a lot of times, like, so a lot of animals have like this enhanced, and it's because they have that the soul that decides to be that animal in the physical body and the density it is only puts a smaller part of their consciousness within the body, and yet they hold a bigger piece of the consciousness in their energetic field, so that they can tend to be much more sensitive, which many talk about how animals can be much more sensitive to things that are multidimensional and stuff like that. So animals know when you're not, when you have something you're not facing and you're irritated. They know all kinds of things about us that we don't want to look at ourselves, and that's part of what they've agreed to come on to be, is the mirror that doesn't have all that egoic chitter chatter of the words in the mind, and much more of the pure sense of energy, right? So there's even a whole practice. Yes, and they are, Sarah says, and they're a safer message board. We won't blame, exactly, and we don't get, we can't get mad at that cute little dog or cat or whatever it is to give us the message. In fact, we're very anxious to appease them of taking on the stuff that they've agreed to take on for us, right? So, you know, um, they, hey Anne, so they have this, so they have this these pieces, right? They come into our lives. My dog that just, she passed away in 2017. She had been my dog growing up. I found out while I had her, and she found me again. Well, so some people will be like, oh, like, she had a pretty crappy first like 3 or 4 years because she had to go live 2 doors down from us, out of our neighborhood, but on the other side of our back fence, a couple doors down, and chained to a fence, chained to a tree, sorry, for the first like 3 to 4 years of her life, and fought and was emaciated and had all kinds of nasty stuff wrong with her. And um, she wanted to find me again. She agreed to find me again at a certain point when I was about to come into this, and she went and decided that that was no big deal, that she could just deal with that. And then when we got her, she had the cushiest life ever. So, but she had so many messages that were so clear to me, and she was such a great lesson board with such kindness and love. And even when she took on some weird things over the years, like she wanted to always sit in sessions with me, with my clients. When I had my office outside of my house for like 3 years, she got really offended that I wouldn't take her in with me, because she's like, "Well, I'm here to help you," and to complete some lessons that had started when I was a child. So when she was my dog as a child. So, and then it was so interesting because we had such an open telepathic communication at the end, because of the nature of the work that I do. We had really developed that. I mean, I literally could just direct a thought or an understanding to her, and she would get it a lot of times in the middle of a session, so she wouldn't bark. Like if she heard because it was like, oh, she'd hear the UPS guy or whatever, and I'd be like, and she would like turn and look at me and be like, yeah, I wouldn't have to say a word. So we had such a telepathic communication at the end. It was all this kind of stuff. And she was like, yeah, no, I'm here to help you as long as you want. And she was such a beautiful dog. She was a Rhodesian Ridgeback mix, and she was like 70 pounds at her optimal weight. So 70-pound dog that lived to be somewhere between 16 and 17 years old. She just wanted to be with us. And it was great. She was a fabulous dog. But she would take on certain things from my clients. She would tell me sometimes telepathically something that I would maybe be missing. And so, like, we can have that kind of camaraderie. And then I had a cat that I used to call the shaman cat, and had to work with him over the years to not, he would literally sit at the feet of one of my clients, and he would start hacking up like a hairball or whatever. Like he would be taking in their stuff to hack out. So I had to teach him to not do that. But, you know, So when we start recognizing these these connections that we actually have, that they find us, that we have agreed in soul agreement that they find us, very like in the same way that any people soul family find us, or we find each other, right? The question to always ask is, so what is that to represent for me here? What are they here to represent for me in love, in such a nice place of love most of the time, right? And we feel so obligated to them. We feel like we need to save them. We feel like they're innocent, and it's like, well, but they're just the same kind of souls as us. They've chosen to be there for whatever purpose or set of lessons to reflect back. And so, there's a lot of people that, I know, and it's a challenge when we are coming to this place of living in a more accepting, um, non-judgmental observance of our realities, that there are animals in abusive situations just like people, and it has been a choice for whatever reason. And can you change it? You can, if you're so guided. um However, there are lessons that are being shown to reflect back to the individual, right? So a lot of times when so we have so many, like, we start to understand all this, right? And then we get into energy work, and we understand that there's a core non-physical purpose to every physical thing we manifest. And so we go to work with them the same way we work with other people. And it's not that they're different than people, but they're different in those bodies for the purpose that they're here. So therefore, it's for us to help them and ourselves, as they are us too, right? Look at what is the purpose that might be reflecting back to me, that might not have to do with what they're holding, but what they might be holding for us. Um, it was interesting because there was a period of time when my husband and I were having a challenging time, and we were reconnecting in new ways and learning how to communicate differently. And my dog would sit in between us, literally, and we would get into these tough disagreements, and she would sit in between us, and she would get these weird things where her ears would puff up like cauliflower ears for no reason. That would be when she would be taking stuff on for us, for other people, for my clients or whatever. And I eventually, in her later years, talked her out of doing that. but but it was a good indicator to say, okay, look, there's something that's really, really, you know, here's a word I've made up in my mind that I use it all the time: frictionated. Something's very frictionated. Something has a lot of friction going on, and it's not on the same wavelength. You guys are missing each other completely. And so I would like start to be able to see when we're going through patterns of that, because she would take it on, right? Because a lot of times you get stuck in what your thoughts are, how your ego's chattering. And pets are great with us to do that. They're great with us to step out of the moment, because, most of the time there are what's the word? They're our haven, right? And they're like, we often have them to be our respite, right, from what we believe we can't, manage in our lives. But, for example, I know somebody else who had been in one codependent relationship after another, very self-absorbed without being in a relationship, and then very self-sacrificial to the other extreme when they are in a relationship. And their partner died, and we were talking about stuff, and I said, probably a good idea just to give yourself a break for a couple of years from a relationship, to really find that happy medium, right? The attending to yourself, being aware of what's around you, and being able to be in a relationship and both having your own space and all that kind of stuff. So so then a dog showed up, and the individual ended up adopting the dog, and hasn't had a relationship since. This is an older person, because it's sort of like the codependency has sort of like um, expressed itself in the dog. And the dog has come in, a fabulous, beautiful, sweet girl. The dog has she takes on the anxiety of the owner, which is what a lot of times the animals do. So a lot of times you look at an animal who's angry, who is, snappy or edgy or anxious, The key is to turn it around and say, is that coming from me? Is that coming from somebody in the household that they're taking on and reflecting back to me? Um, Sometimes they hold the space of when we believe we need to have something to master our surroundings, right? So, like, I know a lot of single people who get a dog because they feel like, that's safer. Um, but yet, really, it's they're just a reflection of you, which means you have that inside of you. And so, to be safe, to be in a place of power and have a strong foundation. And so, there's just so many different facets of how we look at things. This is just, like I said, it's we're not used to looking at animals as a powerful entity in our lives besides in giving us love, right? Except they really, then we're shortchanging them by not looking at them for the full purpose of why they come into our realities. I had a cat, Merlin, who I only had for 18 months, and he was fabulous. He came to me, he had such a rough early life, and he had like no tail. He only had one eye. Some kids had apparently set him on fire as a kitten, and he was this gorgeous cat, sweet as could be. And I did a lot of work with him when he came in and said, okay, you can have an easy life now. So let's like get over the suffering to get where you're going, all that kind of stuff. And I can't even remember what that was all about, but we cleared all that out. And I said, okay, well, now you could just be a cat. And well, he also taught me about acceptance, about letting go, about being in a place of love so much that, and also to also be able to let it go, even when sometimes it blindsides you, right? And we mourn and we grieve. And how many people I've talked to that have said, and I've said the same thing, that we mourn our pets more than we mourn people sometimes when they pass, because they are this reflection of unconditional love to us. But in that reflection of unconditional love, in their illnesses and their diseases and their injuries, what the thing to ask is, what are they showing us? What are they showing us? And this individual's dog that has had anxiety issue after anxiety issue and doesn't do well with other people, doesn't do well with other animals, and it takes a long time for the dog to get used to other people, and one of the only people that the dog will be around. And she's so sweet, and yet I've seen her physically take on the anxiety of her owner. I've seen it happen like in a moment, and then they're snapping and barking and growling and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, what an easy reflection. There's an entire healing modality out there. There's an entire practice. It's a fascinating practice. It's called equine assisted coaching, where and I know somebody who's written a book on it, and she does a fabulous job with it. I tried out a session once, and it was really cool. With horses, we actually do energy work with horses, because horses are like such a tremendously huge energy field, right? So they come in, and we talk about like how we have our sensory fields typically are, I want to say, what did it say, 30 to 50 feet out, depending on the individual, right? And it dissipates as we go. And with horses, it's like 3 times that. So they're hypersensitive, which is why they can be edgy and stuff like that, because they can feel all this stuff going around them. And I did a session with somebody on that, with my friend who had written the book on it and everything. And it was really cool because, like, you have to first, you stand in the vicinity of the horses, and you don't really interact with them. Um, then you get closer, you sort of stand on the edge of the corral with there were two, she had two at the time. And then so she's observing what the horses are doing as I'm just standing there. And then, then there's another step where you get closer and then you interact with them, or one that wants to interact with you. And the way they interact is a clear guidance when you learn how to read them on what there is for you to maybe look at to shift within yourself. Great mirrors, right? And so horses, because they have such an amped up, really obvious energy, and some people have a huge fear of them, but like those who love them really love them, and they don't have like the in-house pet kind of interaction with us that like dogs and cats do, and other similar small animals. but they have such a clear representation, so they can give us such a clear representation without some like marred emotions, right, that we have because it's not, because they're not within our house. And what came up, I remember, and I don't even remember what it was, but I remember what came up. She asked me after the session with the horses, and she goes, "So this is what I saw. This is how the horses interacted here. This is what happened with the horses here. This is what happened when this horse, interacted with you, da da." And it was so spot on for some of the stuff that I was going through. It was pretty incredible, right? So it's like, we use all these tools on seeing ourselves in the mirror, looking at our own consciousness. We talk about how it is so, so important for us to look inside to get to really that sense of calm, centeredness, to really resolve the world's issues as we consider them, right? To help evolve the world. The key is looking inside. And one of the best ways for us to look inside is by looking at what's around us, and knowing that everything around us is a message back to us. So what is it, like the thing is to always ask, and we always try, so the thing is we always try to personalize it to the, like, to an animal, to a pet, as if they're a person, and have the same kind of agreements and goals to come in that body at that time. And often that's not the case, right? So it's a little bit of a different perspective. But the thing is to say, okay, so the animals around us I'm like, even when you're going nature, you can tell when an animal's interested in you, when they're near you. That's why we have in like Native American stuff all kinds of earthbound spirituality. You have things like totems, spirit totems, people call spirit totems. And it's like, well, it's what energies you hold that are represented in an animal, because animals have some very specific energies based on what their habits are, because they don't have the chatteriness of the chattiness of the egoic mind the way we do. So they hold energies much more in a much more pure manner to reflect back to us. So that's how we get to that place of seeing, like, when we suddenly are seeing this. What I tell people all the time, messages, everything around us is a message, right? So if, when we suddenly are seeing a certain kind of animal that we haven't seen before, when a fox crosses our path, when, a hawk comes in front of us, or an eagle, or like all kinds of different, even a mouse, which is funny because I have one of my daughters, I call her the Pied Piper because mice follow her everywhere, which is hysterical. Like, nobody else can be bothered by a mouse, but she will be, right? Um, so it's, I'm like, always, well, are you ever going to resolve what that is? That the mouse is bringing you as a message? Have you stopped and asked what that's bringing you? And it's not for me to tell you, it's for you to look at yourself. Because, yeah, and then we have standard messages. We do have standard messages that, animals tend to have, because they hold certain kinds of energies, with as a reflection to us. And yet, I always tell people, yeah, there are guidelines. Like, there's this fabulous book, and I can't even think of the author. So anybody who's watching, because I know most of you have it or know of it, is called Animal Speak. Animal Speak? I think it's Animal Speak. I don't use the books that much anymore. I use guidance. So, but it was a great. Ted Andrews is the author. He's done a bunch of books on animals and stuff, but I think it's called Animal Speak, and it's got some great, guidelines as to what different animal messages are when they cross your path. All kinds: land, ocean, air, you name it. But so here's the thing: they have this much purer energy, and when they react and interact with us, they're giving us a message that's very clear for us to see. I can't even tell you how many unique animal interactions I've had in my life that were so clear on messages back to me in the moment. And they usually come out of a place of being um, open to getting an answer, right? And so if you see something like, and so that's the whole thing. So pets, we can tend to get lost with, because then we have them in our home. We think of them in we think of them in terms of people, right? As people in our lives. They're our pets. They're our kids in many ways, right? So it's like, it's important for us to step back and the not put it all on their shoulders. And yes, they have their own journeys and they choose what they have. And as I would always say, is like, okay, when I had the cat that I called my shamanic cat, I would yeah, this is hysterical. Like, I'll tell you this one thing. I had somebody coming in to take a class who had broken her shoulder literally the weekend before. And so she was on like painkillers and whatever. And she came in early her to help to alleviate so she'd be comfortable for the class for the weekend. And so she was in my office and she wanted to sit up because it was her shoulder that was broken. And I had thought I had closed my office door all the way so that my cat could not get in at the time. He's passed away since, but he came in and because the door was like open a crack, he came in the middle of the session, like we're way out there. He sits underneath the chair right on the side of the shoulder that's broken, and he hacks up and throws up all over the underneath the chair. And then he gets up and walks out, and just like that. And I remember being guided to continue on with the session. No, this person is totally an animal lover, so she didn't care. But I was guided to continue with the session, and I was biting back laughter because I was like, okay, so he took something in for her and puked it out. And afterwards, she goes, it's really funny is that, yeah, it was helping, like what you were doing was helping. And then when he came in and did that, it was like some big, huge thing shifted. I'm like, yeah, there's the shamanic cat. But I had to teach him to tell him, okay, I appreciate it and I have so much gratitude, but I would prefer you did not take it into your body to, put it to expel it. You can help energetically. And I've had cats that they come in and they share a unique energy that they have that helps to alleviate situations or whatever. And it's interesting. They don't do it as much anymore because I allow them to all be this unified singularity, right, within the household, within what I'm working on. So they might be in, but they just are joined in energetically in the whole, and they're just part of the whole process. So it becomes more of a lesson for us on how to see things out of the box without expectations and without judgment, because if we get that they're agreeing to do something for us, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen miraculous things happen because we've shifted things for one person, not the animal. They come to me about the animal. One time I did a whole session with somebody who the animal had like a liver tumor or something like that, and it was just really, it was, they could feel it, they could palpate it, and they really adored this dog. And the woman asked if I could do a session on the dog, so I did remotely, and I did. And it was funny because I went out there and I ended up doing a session on her son, and it was so odd that I had gotten so deeply into it, got through all of this stuff, and that was some like soul agreement from the beginning, and he had all this stuff, and that so like the dog was taking it on for him, and so we went back to before he was born to erase that soul agreement, so he didn't have to have that particular kind of lesson and all that kind of stuff, and then the dog never had to have it. So let me just tell you, like that was one session, and they were taking him in to have like this follow up MRI like a week after, and it made a believer of that person in terms of energy work because she came back to me like a week and a half later or whenever they got the results, and she goes, the liver is fine. And she was so shocked, and I'm like, this is how these things happen. I know it can be crazy to the mind, but they're an extension of us, and they agree to come in as a very specific extension of us as our pets, even if it's for a short period of time. It's usually a very singular or specific set of lessons that we might not want to look at. Like Sarah said earlier, they're a safer message board that we won't blame and we won't judge them because, they're cute and we can pet them and we can hug them and love them and squeeze them. So, and we feel okay doing that where we would blame or judge ourselves sometimes if we would see it. And I know people have judged themselves when I've worked with them and their pets, and they've said, oh, well, the pet was taking this on or whatever, and they're like, why would we have this agreement? Why would they do that? Why would they do that? And I'm like, because it's part of you. It's just another part of you, like incarnate in that dog or cat or other animal. Um, if we're all one, that's how we get to that point of perceiving it. And it's like so that you would have that message to move on from the set of lessons that you might be getting tripped up on, that you might be missing. And so, that individual I was talking about with the dog who came in to be our codependent. I will say, I will say that over the 10 years so far she's had that dog, that she has evolved in the way she has her relationships. And like I said, she doesn't have relationships like romantic. She hasn't had any romantic relationship in that period of time. But in her relationships and how she's reacted, and the dog has gotten better over the years. So it's interesting as somebody shifts to see how their pets can shift too, um, and have a completely different demeanor, or something can just disappear that they had. There's all kinds of different options. So the key for this, so Sarah says we're motivated to relieve the animal suffering. I can't believe I forgot to turn off my sound. Um, and if we are aware, yeah. So if we're aware of looking at our pets to say, oh my gosh, I want to relieve the suffering. I don't want them to be sick because I love them so much, because they do so much in terms of comfort for me, and they're warm and snuggly and I love them, and I don't want them to be sick, right? We're a little more motivated to look at our stuff to know that, well, they might be taking stuff on for me, and the faster that I might resolve that for myself, the faster they can resolve that for them. And sometimes that means them passing on. Sometimes it means that it's time for them to transition out, and that's their sole purpose of coming here. I tried a couple of times to convince, especially this cat Merlin I was talking about, like, to convince him to stay, that he didn't, like he could just be a cat and be happy and loved and spoiled. Um, and he lived out, 18 months with us and was pampered and spoiled and loved and was the sweetest boy ever. And then he did pass. Uh, so, and I was crushed, but I also understood that he completed what he came to us to do for himself and with us. So it's a whole, and many of us get to this thing, and what happens is we get into this control thing, right? And it's an egoic thing embedded in expectation as we do this work in energy healing. Like, yes, I've seen miraculous things. I've seen miraculous changes, instantaneous healings, and all kinds of stuff for people and for animals in doing this work over the past 11 years. But, it's it's also it's also a great lesson for us to be able to let them go, and to realize the ego slips in this terms of trying to say, oh well, look at what I can do. I can do this. And if you can't change something, which it tends to be a lot clearer and sharper sometimes with animals even than people, actually, you can often see more change in people when you're doing energy work than animals. And it's not necessarily the belief work, it has to do with that they're reflecting something back at you. So if you are recognizing that they're reflecting something back at you and they've taken on whatever this is for that, then we can focus on, like Sarah said, so we might be more motivated to look at our stuff. We might say, yeah, okay, I don't want you to suffer. And I know that was our agreement to take this on so I would see it. So I'm going to take it on and look at my own stuff and see how I can resolve that lesson or whatever. And then after that, it's your choice to just stay and be loved, or to go if that's your choice. And that's a big lesson for us on acceptance and transitions, and knowing that that's really our purpose when we incarnate. It has to do with the set of lessons that we came here to process, to release, to let go of, to complete. And then we're done with the physical body that we've chosen, no matter what form it is. So that's for you. That's your takeaway for this week. That's the takeaway for all of us, to look at our pets and see their well-being, see where they are, energetically and emotionally and physically. And if there are issues that are going on, ask. Go in here. And this is where guidance is really important. That whole independence that I've talked about here, that Sarah and I have talked about on our Ascended World podcast on Monday mornings, um, which is, the biggest thing is to get really strong on your guidance. Because if your guidance can tell you, is this from me? Yes or no, simple as that. Well, then you can explore this way if you get yes. Okay, well, then let me look at what that is because I don't want you to suffer because of me. Then we start to judge ourselves, and it's like, no, it's with acceptance and observance and to know it was an agreement to say, okay, so what is important for me to look at so that I might be able to shift the situation just so that it becomes more complete. And also so that, even if that animal goes and another one comes in, that you don't have to have that lesson and the next animal have the same thing. Because I know people have had several animals, several pets in their lives that have taken on the same kind of disease or whatever at the end of their life. And then it's like, okay, well, have you looked at why that keeps on coming in front of you? So there's a lot of different ways to perceive that. So take that away. That's the takeaway for this week is to look at that. Even in the past, animals that you've had, pets that you might have had that have passed away, you look at all those situations and say, have I resolved the lessons? Look, were those lessons for me? Were those lessons for somebody else in the household? Were those lessons, because if they were for somebody else in the household and then has nothing to do with you, and you might love them and be upset, but it has to be for the individual that's related to. So, and to look at that and say, what was my lesson here, and to complete it so that you don't have to do it again, right? So that then we could just choose partners like we could choose pet partners, right? Like we choose people partners from higher business, right? Which is I am complete and singular, in a singularity on my journey, and so are you. And let's just have fun together because we're just, doing this at the same time, in the same place. Much more fun and exciting and easy, right? Than trying to figure out the puzzling stuff that we can come up with. So take a look at all that this week. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for coming and joining me. This is Angela Coulter signing out with this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one.